What's going on with string theory? Why did Weinstein call Michio Kaku crazy and out of his mind?
Well, okay, so I would say that there has been some political issues. I would say string theorists are very bad at PR. They're scientists, not marketers. And also just the way that the culture works, academics got comfortable with getting support from the government after World War II. And so they got comfortable to not explaining their ideas to the public because they were getting funding, because they were saying, hey, look, if we research this, we got to stop Russia. We got to stay on top of Russia. That whole mentality in academia is dying off. So now when you get into this, well, to some degree, I mean, it's not the Cold War anymore. I mean, yeah, right. Okay, things have been heightened to some degree, but I don't know. To me, I wasn't alive then, but I feel like the tension after World War II is a little heightened, I would say.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure.
And so now we're at this point where people are asking for money in the same ways that they used to in the 70s, and it's getting a little bit harder. And you know, they lost their skills at communicating. I mean, scientists aren't always the best communicators. But okay, let's dive into the details a little more. So string theory at first was in the 70s was just an attempt to describe the strong force, which relates to the proton-proton collisions. You get a lot of the forces involved there are the strong force.
Okay. And
so they were trying to figure out what happened there. And they realized that the math kind of got simpler when you look at high energy processes. And notice that key, the math got simpler.
At high energy.
Yeah. And that's true in general. And so what they realized is when you look at this high energy physics, it actually looks like the force carrier of the strong force might actually be a string, an extended object, rather than a particle.
Okay.
And so that was the idea. And they ran with it. But they started studying this theory more, and then they realized it was a theory of quantum gravity. So that got exciting. But then it kind of hit some other roadblocks. Eventually, they started to realize that it seemed to solve problems that other theories ran into. But there's a debate over that. It's some people, it's a very small community, a very small minority thinks that result maybe not be as important. Mm-hmm. But anyways, basically what happens is the string theorists find successful things that make the theory look like it might be a good theory, but there's no concrete experimental evidence. And so one of these things that was predicted was extra particles. And so, but part of the problem is they haven't explored all the ways to use the math. And so they developed one theory, the minimally supersymmetric standard model, okay, and that predicted some extra particles. They didn't know the mass of the particle, and they wanted grant money. So they said, hey, maybe the LHC can detect these particles. But there was actually no reason to ever suspect that the LHC could detect those particles. They had no idea what them, and it seemed like the mass of these particles had to be really high. Mm-hmm. And Einstein said E equals mc squared, so high mass means high energy.
Right.
And so as I was mentioning, this high energy theory, that's where things, that's the unknown. We don't know what's going on there. Right? And so we know the string theorists were saying they think that these particles should exist, but they have no idea what energy. I mean, it could be way higher, but they said, hey, maybe it's really low energy, even though there was kind of arguments suggesting it shouldn't be found at low energies. And they ran with it anyways. And the entire community didn't, like a lot of the experts in the field latched onto it and believed the story to get the grant money, and it didn't work. The LHC never detected anything else. But there was never actually any good reason to expect it in the first place. So then a lot of people say, oh, that proves string theory is wrong because, you know, and so they could always say, well, these particles come in at higher and higher energy, so people claim it's unfalsifiable. And a lot of string theorists also aren't sure if it's falsifiable or not. I think it actually is falsifiable for other reasons, but, you know, and I want to stress that I don't see myself as a string theorist either. I didn't want to study string theory in grad school because I didn't like the state of the community. So I'm not saying this as someone from the inside, so to speak. I looked at myself as an outsider to the string theory community. I cared more about quantum field theory. My whole thing was gravity can be treated as a quantum field theory. And the string theorists are basically saying, no, quantum field theory doesn't work for gravity. But it turns out even to get good string theory, which is some of the work that Michio Kaku did, was for string field theory, which is quantum field theory of strings. So from my perspective, string theory is kind of ripping off quantum field theory, because at the end of the day, string theory is just another quantum field theory. And so they're trying to portray it as this different final theory, when really we know quantum field theory works well for the LHC, all the particle collisions. And so there's kind of this dilemma, right? This marketing campaign issue where people are labeling, to me, it's all the same stuff, but some theories have supersymmetry, some theories don't. And then the ones with supersymmetry often get looped into string theory, which is just some weird symmetry. It's just some weird mathematics that they like that gets around some no-go theorem. And so Eric Weinstein is basically saying, can't we just ignore all the no-go theorems and play around with ideas? And I mean, in some regards, that's a little disrespectful to previous work, right? If someone puts out a paper and says this whole direction doesn't work for some reasons, I mean, typically, if you want to publish something else, you have to describe, if you come up with a new answer, that's fine, as long as you can describe why that no-go doesn't apply to your work. But Eric Weinstein is saying, let's just ignore all these no-go theorems. Let's just carry on anyways and just disregard what other scientists are saying.
What is a no-go again?
Okay, yeah. So this happens a lot where they'll come up with some like math theorem that says you can't do this. It's a no-go.
Okay.
And so it's a little problematic because a lot of times there's kind of baked in assumptions that don't get articulated. Really what usually happens is the paper is written really well and the assumptions are stated very clearly. And so they'll say, assuming A, B, and C, D isn't possible. But then culturally, people read the papers and they start to forget about the assumptions and they start to get a little dogmatic with it. I've seen this happen in string theory where I have some work that got around some of the no-go theorems, and it's difficult for me to share my work with the string theorists because they won't even look at it because there's this no-go theorem that I heard about that I haven't even looked into because there's so many papers. So I don't know how to, I feel uncomfortable, so I'm not even going to touch it, right? So that's pretty common, where really everyone's overloaded with work and trying to identify what's something concrete that they can actually understand and make progress with. And so that's why I don't get too mad at people for suppressing. It's not suppression. It's just that everyone has a finite attention span and is trying to focus on what they can grasp. And so if you haven't studied this no-go theorem in detail, and someone is presenting a new idea that claims to get around the no-go theorem, but is different, you have to evaluate, well, did they actually get around that no-go theorem, yes or no, which means you have to read that paper. And sometimes they can get pretty technical, and some people don't want to spend their time doing those things. So